Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another installment of Be Your Own Boss. I'm your host, David Gamble. We're here to discuss a person's life, career, and how they got to this point in their career. And then the guest I have today is a man who has not only watched the future of flight, but he's built the systems that makes it possible. Mike Hirschberg spent several years as a principal aerospace engineer on major programs, including the Joint Strike Fighter, but he truly stepped into the boss mindset when he took the helm of the Vertical Flight Society. Over 12 years as executive director, didn't just manage a nonprofit, he treated it like a high growth startup. He branded the 80-year-old organization, pioneered the global eVTOL, which is electric vertical takeoff for those who don't know that, revolution, and grew it to an influential point where NASA recently awarded him the Exceptional Public Service Medal. Quickly before we get to the interview, if you're getting value from this video, go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps people find this content. If you're really interested in hearing more people's experience and becoming their own boss, be sure to subscribe and tap the bell and you won't miss into what's coming next. With that, greetings and welcome, Mike.
Thanks.
So let's start, kind of with your background and how you got into kind of the aerospace industry.
Sure. Well, thanks, David, and glad to be here. And I do hope people find value from what I'm going to talk about, and especially if you're interested in aerospace. But even if you're not, maybe this will be interesting. So yeah, I mean, I grew up single mom, four kids, tough, but my dad did support me going to college, so I got a degree in aerospace. I was actually very interested in language, inspired by the Lord of the Rings and J.R. Tolkien.
Okay.
So that was a big influence on me. Very interested in language. But January of 1986, I was a senior in high school, and the space shuttle Challenger exploded. And either right before that or right after that, I can't actually remember. Like I was like, I want to be an aerospace engineer. Even as a kid, we'd go. We grew up near Washington D.C., so we'd go into the Aerospace Museum, which opened in 1976. Um, like I was always just really fascinated by aircraft and rockets and everything. So got a degree in aerospace engineering from the University of Virginia. Got a job working for the Navy, the Naval Air Systems Command on rocket engines. That was 1991. Unfortunately, defense drawdown, the peace dividend, as they said, they were reducing. It was called a reduction in force, a RIF. They were reducing the personnel, government personnel, not unlike today, but trying to voluntarily get people to leave. So they basically closed out my office. And maybe I would have kept my job, in logistics or something pretty boring. So I went to work for a company called Aerojet. They were building replacement boosters for the shuttle. This was the Advanced Solid Rocket Motor Program, so still in aerospace propulsion. And then Congress cut that program. So, after, 2.5 years in the industry, I was on my third job working for a defense consulting company that was called Answer Analytic Services. Did propulsion, the aircraft and propulsion for the Air Force's F-22 fighter program. And then I won the Joint Strike Fighter program, which is now the F-35. It was first started in '93. I jumped over to the JSF program office and was really engaged in the propulsion and aircraft integration there. Then after that program was won, I lost my job for the third time and went to another company called Centra Technology, and they supported work on for DARPA, and got really interested in from JSF vertical takeoff and landing capabilities. Started writing and doing some editing for what was then the American Helicopter Society for their magazine. And anyway, eventually things worked out where the previous executive director was going to retire, and I had been involved in a lot of different ways, but eventually he encouraged me to put my name in for the hat, and I was selected to be the executive director in 2011.
What of those different jobs that you had? I mean, what stood out from you that you learned from that? Because what was, you said you wanted to be in aerospace. What was the purpose of selecting that from? You mentioned the tragedy? Was it just the fact of doing something different, getting into space? What was the driver in
I
your
don't
head?
know. Some of it I felt like it was a calling. Again, I'm not, it's been lost now, but I have an association with that accident, as being seared in my mind as it is in many other
Most
people's
everything.
at the time. I had actually applied under the liberal arts school for University of Virginia, and I sometime after that I wrote and asked to be transferred to the engineering school, which I didn't really have an engineering background. From wasn't really that strong in math, and I mean I had the normally required courses and everything, but um, yeah, I don't know. It was suddenly there was an alignment, maybe that just brought clarity to my own mind of the interest I had in airplanes and mainly rockets, or particularly rockets at that time. The Skylab actually fell on my birthday, so that was kind of another kind of unique coincidence.
Interesting.
So I
So was it more of you keeping up with, I mean, did you have that before you were in college? Or just was it like an apex because of the tragedy?
Yeah, it
Just
was like a
like
nexus,
crystallized it.
apex where I had all this interest as a kid, but it didn't gel into something like, "Oh, I wanted to do this as a career," until maybe in that, refining moment where it was, those were aerospace engineers, I think most of them that lost their lives, and I think it just brought it to the forefront of, like, I like space, I like space shuttles, I like rockets, so, we'd launch rockets as a kid, so somehow all that came together and, like I said, I wanna be an aerospace engineer, and so I
Yeah.
am.
Well, when you started, okay, so you're I guess it was 4 jobs after college that culminated before you get to,
Yes.
Helicopter Society, because I remember
American Helicopter
when
Study,
it
yeah.
was Helicopter Society. That how did you bridge the gap from, I guess, the JSF, kind of got you exposed to the Flight Society or
Yeah,
Helicopter
exactly
Society?
right. So I was working on my master's degree at nearby Catholic University, which is in DC. I had started actually when I was working for the Navy for that first for that year, and I had one of the people there, one of the instructors. They didn't have an aerospace department, but one of the instructors was an aerospace guy, and had anyway, he taught a course on VSTOL, which, there's a lot of acronyms. So VTOL, VTOL is vertical takeoff and landing, which is really hard. And the Joint Strike Fighter was short takeoff and vertical landing, STOVL, which is easier. And then the whole gamut is under this, vertical and or short takeoff and landing, VSTOL. There's a couple more acronyms. We'll get to those later. But so he taught a course on VSTOL, which is kind of the history and the technology and the physics of why it's so hard to have I'll say an airplane or a helicopter, but a helicopter is a bit easier. But how hard it is to do basically combine the vertical takeoff and landing capabilities of a helicopter with a high speed forward flight of a fixed wing aircraft. And so I took that class, and then this VSTOL program, the Joint Strike Fighter, which was interested in developing a STOVL fighter. That that was directed by I guess that was the Clinton administration. As the defense drawdown, there were all these Air Force, Navy, Marines. Everybody had these programs, so they said, "Well, just combine them all into a Joint Strike Fighter program." So those two kind of things happened. And then, there wasn't I've been involved with professional societies all my life, and there wasn't really a society for, VSTOL stuff, except for the American Helicopter Society. They've been using the tagline of, vertical flight society since back to the 60s. So they considered, um, you know, VSTOL aircraft, fixed wing aircraft, part of their purview. And so they got really engaged with the Joint Strike Fighter program and had a number of conferences and forums and such focused on the technologies and requirements. So that basically became kind of the home of the professional society that was supporting it. One of them, but maybe I'd say the leading professional society that really embraced it. And then, yeah, I wrote a couple little articles. I wrote a really long article, a 20-page article, and they're like, "Yeah, we'd really like to have you as a managing editor of the magazine." I'm like, boy, that sounds like a lot of work, but I acquiesced into it, and yeah, so I mean, I I learned a ton about helicopters from editing the magazine and participating in the VFS, the AHS conferences, and just all my exposure, beyond the Joint Strike Fighter into the history, what had been done before, and then all the other attempts and trials, and then with the actual development itself, and then since then with a lot of other
Right.
programs
So,
over the
so
last
what was that?
few
How was
years.
that involvement? I guess while you were doing the other jobs, was it a few years? Was it like 5 years before you took the job as executive?
So it's about closer to 20, no, 15 years, I guess. So I started in the Joint Strike Fighter program office in 1995, and I became the executive director in 2011. So yeah, so 23, sorry,
So 20.
1993 was when the GSF program started, and that was about the time I took that VSTOL course. The first article actually that I ever wrote that was published was for the American Helicopter Society's magazine, which is called Vertiflight, like vertical flight. And that was the one, it was a 22 page history of all the different combinations that had flown, in the 50s and 60s mainly. It had that, vertical takeoff landing capability besides helicopters. And yeah, they really liked it. So they kept encouraging me to do more and more until 99. They're like, "Oh yeah, how would you be the man?"
So 99 until you were basically managing editor and basically took over.
Yeah, exactly. So in 2011, and I continued. This was a bit of a well, this was a real challenge for me because I basically I continued being the editor of the magazine and spent, I'll say more time than anybody on publishing each issue of the magazine, while I was also the director of the nonprofit. So at its peak, and one of the reasons why I stepped down in 2023, is that at its peak, I was working, 80, 100 hours a week on the business, on the society, because I was doing the magazine, I was doing a lot of outreach. We really tried to grow it into new, evolving areas like eVTOL, and so it was taking years off my life, and being your own boss
You don't.
is terrible because you just drive yourself as much as you feel is needed. And I'm like, oh, of course I need to do this. I mean, this is so important. Should we start this other conference? Well, of course we should. We need to expand and grow. So it was
I mean, it,
psychologically, I was wired to kill myself, basically.
right. I mean, for the society, is there board members that kind of
Yeah.
help out with that? So those are
It's
the
an
ones that
outside
brought your
board.
board, huh?
Yeah. So it's an outside board. So in a nonprofit, you can, or I guess any business, you can have an inside board or an outside board. An inside board is, some or all of the members are of the board of directors are employees. We have a completely outside board. So I had a board of directors, which is comprised of 29 people, and it's representatives from the different regions of the Vertical Flight Society, as well as kind of the leaders of industry, special appointed people. And then I was not a voting member of the board, so I was required to be there, but I had no vote. It was so no employees were part of the board. So it's again completely outside board. So they were helpful in guidance, and I would say they were supposed to do things within their own organizations, with their own regions to help support the mission of VFS. But it's not like they could really take on work for the most part.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it does you managing the, the society, how much influence, I guess you have a lot of influence when it comes to changing the name from Helicopter Society to strictly VFS, vertical flight. Was that totally your decision or did you have to go through the board for that?
No, that was definitely a board decision. Like maybe I thought about it too much. But basically, you look back to the magazine over the years, and every 5 or 10 years, there'll be another discussion. Should we change the name? There's a great there's a great joke. In the 70s, there was the tilt rotor aircraft, which then in the 80s became the V-22 program. So there were, and it wasn't just America. Even from the beginning, there were members from the UK. It's founded on World War II, so there were people from allied nations, the UK and Canada. So anyway, the joke was in the 80s with the V-22, which is not a helicopter, it's a tilt rotorcraft that and they wanted to be an international. They were going to call it the International Rotorcraft Society, but then it would have been IRS, and like nobody would have been had wanted to have anything to do with
That's
it.
not good.
Uh, but yeah, I mean, we so then in '97 they changed the brand to AHS International, but people would still spell out AHS. Oh, it's the American Helicopter Society. And particularly when I started in 2011, and then through the next several years, we were doing a lot of stuff with drones, which aren't helicopters. We were really growing internationally. We changed the bylaws so that basically, no matter where you lived in the world, you had the same benefits. Or it previously been, well, we're going to charge you $20 extra for shipping overseas, including to Canada. And you didn't have quite the same representation. You didn't have elected members. You had appointed members overseeing, Europe or Asia or whatever. So I basically made it so it was ecumenical. No matter where you lived in the world, you were a member. And then with this explosion in these electric vertical takeoff and landing, we keenly wanted to make people aware that they weren't helicopters. So basically, I'll tell you, it was a long process. We did survey, with the approval of the board. Like at first we had a group, ad hoc working group to look at this, and like for people to being on that I invited to be on this group, I said I want to make sure that you're not dead set against changing the name, and you're not dead set against keeping the name. I want people that are only going to think about this as being an option. And part of the thing was, I always like to say that a steward of the society for it turned out 11 years. I didn't want to be the one that screwed it up,
That's true, right? That'd be your
because there were
legacy,
board members
right?
who said, well, people that join the American Helicopter Society, now you change the name to Vertical Flight Society or whatever it ends up being, then like, do they want their money back because you're no longer representing them? So we did all kinds of surveys of the members, and there was people that were passionate on both sides, but it kind of came down to kind of 30 30 30 or a third of some people really liked the name just because it's heritage. Some people really hated the name because of its limitation. you know a lot of people said either one's fine. So it basically came down to the board. We did you
A
know
lot of
do
a
all
lot
the
of
due
discussion. I mean,
a lot of
was
we
this
did.
a long process to kind of get it down
Yeah,
to
probably, let's say 2 years, or maybe a little more. But through this process,
that's still a lot. I mean, to me, 2 years, goes back like this now,
it does,
but 2
looking back.
years back then probably, like, was arduous with the day in and day out
Yeah, and
of
people wanted to fall on the swords. You have to change it, or you can't change it. Anyway, it was, I ended up, we had these discussions. We ended up leading the board, and it was a unanimous decision to change it. Now, interestingly, they said, well, we're not 100% sure this is like that. We're not 100% sure. You can change the brand, but don't change the actual legal name. So the legal name is what I actually had changed it to in 2011 with their approval, but it's the American Helicopter Society International Incorporated, but it goes by Vertical Flight Society, which I felt was you know, I I felt was a pain, because then I have to, well, when are we called this? Well, for legal documents for the
oh,
American
right,
Helicopter
yeah.
Society International Incorporated, for everything else. So, for IRS audit, stuff like that, it's a
I
pain.
mean, with that, I mean, compare it. Compare Flight Society with your earlier career. Is it something like a progression, or do you feel like that was your calling? Or after 11 years, do you feel like, "Man, should I have done something else?" I mean, do you have any regrets? Let's put it that way.
No, no regrets having taken the job, for sure. I would say it's culmination of my my professional life, I sort of saw it as, maybe this isn't a good analogy now, but, becoming president, or, getting the expression I used a lot was, making the Olympic team, right? So I'm going to,
So you did a triathlon and
yeah, I mean, I
you
did all this
conquered you
stuff and I killed
conquered your
myself
industry.
and yeah. And now, right. Overcoming hindrance. And now I've stepped down and now I can use what I've learned and my talents and my experience to help others.
Well, but you said you're with the society at least 20 years before you took over. Did you see the electric aviation come before it? I mean, it's right around the time that you started. I remember
Yeah.
Joby is basically incorporated around 2011.
Yeah. They were incorporated in 2009.
Was it 2009? Okay.
And the company that's now Whisk was 2010. So yeah, they've been going, they've both been going now 15, 16 years.
16 years.
So in 2011, I have a chart I normally present, but in 2011 there were like 4 or 5 aircraft that flew for the first time with electric power. One of them, which was very well known at the time, the other ones are all less known or kept secret for many years. But Volocopter, they flew this famous picture. I think it's famous video. I think it's 18 electric propellers, and the guy sitting at Thomas Senkel in Germany, he's sitting on a yoga ball. It really is a yoga ball,
That's
and
right.
they had this framework that held these 18 propellers. He's holding sorry, I think he's holding a remote control, remote, whatever. But he's got a motorcycle helmet on with a GoPro camera and their video. And basically, it was just a bunch of I'll say tinkerers or
Yeah. Gara-
engineers and
garage
physicists.
garage engineers, as I call them.
Yeah, and they're like, "Hey, let's see if we could do this," and they did. And then, like overnight, within the next several months, they got like 11 million views, and like, "Oh wow, this is kind of crazy. Maybe we should do something with it." So they ended up designing an aircraft. Sorry, the company was well. They ended up designing an aircraft that they called the Volocopter. Eventually, that became the name of the company, and they got investors and stuff like that. And they're still going today through many trials and tribulations.
Well, yeah, through mergers or bankruptcy to buying it out from the does it Diamond Aviation, right? I think they
Yeah, it's
bought
a
'em.
Chinese company that owns Diamond Aircraft, or Diamond Aviation, maybe, which is an Austrian company, and they also bought it. And they bought Volocopter for literally pennies on the dollar. It was like $10 million after, or 10 million euros, whatever, after they had invested, half a billion or whatever. So I mean, they basically just took it over for, you know, I mean, $10 million is almost free.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's almost like you get all that IP, and then you can just add on to it. So it's interesting how that's. I don't know if we're at the end of that type of consolidation, or if it's going to expand or contract again over the next couple of years. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I said from the beginning, I mean, I'm not surprised, I'm surprised at the individual cases, but, there were one of the things we did at VFS, we started tracking all these things. And like when I saw Volocopter, I was like, that's ridiculous. These guys are a bunch of idiots. They don't know anything, right? But they progressed. They went from this crazy yoga ball to, a two-seat aircraft. And, it's just amazing what they were able to do and then extrapolate to, or then they continued on to a aircraft that was supposed to be compliant with the European Aviation Safety Administration, EASA, their requirements for certifying a VTOL aircraft, which, in my opinion, drove both of the German companies, Volocopter and Lilium, to bankruptcy because they made them too hard. They basically required a two-seat aircraft with two people in it to have the same
Qualifications and
level of reliability as an airliner with hundreds of passengers, which was just so
ridiculous.
it made everything so heavy and un um, unaffordable. It basically drove them both to bankruptcy. And of course, as I mentioned, Diamond bought them up, and they are going to finish the certification, but they're also going to sell the lighter version, their original prototype size version, as a ultralight aircraft. So they don't have to go through all the certification.
Hey, I mean, I have to ask you something about. I mean, since you've spent so much time with society, do you feel like the business model for the society needs to expand from? Because I've attended the Vertical Flight Society a lot of times, and it's been more to me more technically oriented, to a certain extent. But do you feel like there needs to be like more in business involvement, business modeling, or business like for startups? Because I feel like you mentioned, we got into the 400s or so of people trying to do these startup eVTOLs. And I've dealt with different companies that have, delved into those. There there's hardly a flight path that somebody can follow to make sure, you need to go through these hoops for this type of product. Would that have been something the society could have helped with a little bit more than we did or you did? Or
Well, our main mandate is specifically being a technical society, not a business. It's not a trade organization.
right,
But yeah, you know, I when I was with VFS, I really saw an expansive view of the Vertical Flight Society, trying to be as inclusive as possible. We did during pandemic, we had a series of webinars on fundraising, how to get, government grants, how to get VCs, stuff like that. So, and even just purely helicopters, we want our helicopter companies to be financially very, very profitable and successful so that they can continue to advance the technology and they can support BFS too. So we did have some kind of workshops. We did see that as being, we want to reach out to as many people around the world to let them know about, hey, if you're working on vertical flight aircraft, we're the society for you. And we really liked it when companies would engage with this, attend the meetings, stay at the meetings. We had some companies who were not successful who, we'd invite them to speak and they would come in, they'd give their talk and they'd leave. It's like, well, if you're developing a hybrid aircraft, we had this entire session, this entire day on hybrid aircraft, development to learn something from that. I used to always say, it's a VFS is a charitable nonprofit, but you get out of it what you put into it. If you are only transmitting and not receiving, then that's then you're going to lose out.
right. I mean, it's a give and take, right? If you have a membership and you don't utilize it enough,
Yeah,
or
and there's all kinds of research. I mean, all kinds of resources for research, and
do you
but
think you think that was communicated well enough? Do you think that that was recognized by those companies, even existing OEMs, right? Do you think that was well known that VFS was that, or is it just a lack of knowledge, right? To me, communication's always key,
yeah,
and if
sure,
a lot of times they didn't know, right? Maybe
yeah. You know, VFS, we try to communicate these things. We didn't always find listeners or people who really, what's the word, inculcated it. The CEOs of the different companies would change every few years. So, it used to be more rapidly. Now it's generally, like in the mid 2010s, like 2015 through 2020, like most of the companies turned over at least once, sometimes several times. But a CEO is primarily concerned about profits, making profits. And in fact, I had one, major helicopter OEM. This was actually in 2012 or 2013 when we had a strategy meeting and said something about, well, in like, 3 or 4 years. And he said, just, kind of jokingly, but hey, I'm only as good as my next quarter's, returns,
if
net
it's
profit, right? So,
I mean, it's
so the companies, every couple of years, you'd have to re-explain it to the executives and say, well, you know, you're not going to sell more helicopters by coming to our events and participating, but you'll make better products and you'll have a better idea. Maybe not what's coming next year, but maybe next get decade, like or 5 years from now. Things like these are the technologies that are coming that are in their infancy. And if you look at them now, then you can have a leap ahead capability in your next product line or
well,
for military rotorcraft, right?
yeah.
This is
I mean,
something that the military wants. We'd have the Army technologists and from Navy and other services saying, this is what we're hoping for in the next generation of rotorcraft. So that's an area, not basic, but the preliminary research, the early research and the technology maturation that's coming, they would that they're interested in for the future if they can be properly matured and everything.
Right. I mean, in technology, I mean, what's come out of the vertical, the eVTOLs is all the different systems that have been generated from it, especially the propulsion, right? You're talking about hydrogen, you're talking about batteries, solid state, if they ever get to it. There's so many different things, but it's the, it's just the way you're going to build it and put it together in one aircraft. I get you. I mean, I've worked with Boeing for 20 years and it's, even from an engineering perspective, going to Vertical Flight Society, if you got your manager to somehow fund you to go to one, even though that Boeing had membership, they still had to purchase the tickets and stuff and put it
Yeah,
under their budget. It was hard to convince, people within that unless you're directly involved with an advanced project that, could utilize it. And a lot of times that was a very small slither of the community, to
yeah,
attend. And you go on the other side with startups, it's kinda like, "Well, we don't have the time to go to attend to societies because we're trying to do this or that." And it's kinda
yeah,
like people don't people don't have it in the front of their mind that, getting out and talking with folks actually improves how they address their issues. And I think that's to me, that's I would say it's always communication. It's always a communication issue.
yeah, right. No, sure, and people to actually not just hear what you're saying or see what you're saying, but actually to understand, like, to actually incorporate it. It's like, "Yeah, I guess that makes sense." I had a friend of mine quit a company, leave a company, one of the helicopter OEMs, because it's like, they have so many cutbacks now that, like, maybe I'll be able to go to a conference, once every other year if I write a paper. And so he left. He's like, that's not
Right,
what I
well,
want. Like,
exactly what you just said. It's a career choice now. I get to write a paper and put a check mark something on my career page.
yeah,
But
yeah,
that's not what that's what the society is, I mean, technically for, and it's interesting to look at it that way, but it really doesn't just scratches the surface of the benefit that you could possibly get from it.
yeah. I mean, a lot of it is networking. I mean, we've had all kinds of cases where somebody from a conference meets somebody from another company, and they're like, "Oh wow, I didn't know you did that," and business together, or like they purchase their widget or their technology, whatever. They team for something, and I mean, it again, it's not you're not competing for, today's sales. You're competing for the, next generation of whatever, somebody from a company developing autonomy software, and another company who's developing the sensors, and somebody else that's going to, an OEM that's got the big money for the platform they'll submit a joint proposal for a contract, with the Navy or DARPA or Air Force or whatever.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, kind of wrapping this up, what is your kind of vision for what's gonna happen in the next 5 to 10 years? I mean, is from defense to eVTOLs to, I mean, even commercial. I mean, we didn't barely touched on commercial helicopters. Is there gonna be I mean, I have some of my own, but I'd rather hear what your kind of feelings are when it comes to that for the next 5 to 10 years or so.
Sure. So the current administration is less interested in doing the science and technology, the research, and more on buying capabilities off the shelf. So rather than investing with Lockheed or somebody for a drone program, which admittedly, these big OEM drone programs often eat up a lot of money without results, because then the government says, "Oh, this is too expensive." So rather than investing in these decade-long programs, it's, hey, anybody, Anduril, Shield AI, all these different companies. I want to buy something. I want to buy something that you develop. So that's, I mean, that's a great way to get, advanced technologies in the field. They're maybe not tested out as much as you would from an actual acquisition program. Defense acquisition rules are very arduous. Takes a long time and a lot of steps. So in theory, you could buy something off the shelf, and maybe it'll be wonderful. Maybe it'll be great. Maybe it won't be so great, which, I guess could compare to acquisition programs as well. But, eventually these companies, say a company puts $10 million or $100 million in developing something, and then they're not successful, right? So you only get a couple of those before that company, after they spend all their own money, is out of business. That's one thing with the defense industrial complex is, they're funding research and development, and they often lose money on them as well. The government's basically paying for the development of the aircraft or the system. So I think that, there could be, if everything goes great, it could be a great way to get, new players in the field and getting advanced technology out to the warfighters. Or it may cause the collapse of the, defense industrial complex. I guess we'll see. I firmly believe, VFS, and I personally believe that, science and technology, basic research, advanced research, that these are all really important for advancing the capabilities of the nation. And, competition is great, capitalism is great. Coming up, having companies develop their own solutions is great. But probably need some combination there. Turning to commercial helicopters, commercial aircraft. I mean, there's a lot of competition from there are several U.S. helicopter companies, manufacturers. Basically, Europe is consolidated to Airbus and Leonardo, and they get a lot of good research and development funding from the European Union. They've got great products, competitive prices. On an international stage, you see a lot of you see a lot of innovations just because of the global competition for helicopter technology. And then eVTOL, and there's a lot of I don't know, there's a lot of daggers, a lot of knives out for eVTOL. I mean, there were a handful of companies who started before 2020, and there were a lot, hundreds and hundreds of other companies that started in the last 10 years, that didn't survive. I think I looked the other day of like the 12 companies that started before 2027, like all of them except for Lilium are still in business. So people who started early and gained an edge and have been in this course of, stepping through all the milestones and all the requirements for developing aircraft and then flying the heck out of them. But they have a lot of data and they're going to be successful, or they have a high likelihood of being successful. A lot of hype when Uber came out with the Uber Elevate about 2020 or 2023. And I said at the time, like from a technology perspective, we don't like care whether it's 2023 or 2028. Like we want to get to be out there and successful. And I was admonished saying, no, you're going to dry up all the venture capital investments. And if you say, they want to pay back in 2023, I'm like, well, like they're not my constituents. So here we see 2028. I think there'll be two or three
Keeping it going.
companies in the US and elsewhere for eVTOL aircraft that'll be certified and operational. Maybe in theory, maybe this end of this year, but maybe next year we'll get at least one of them. But by 2028, I think we'll have this eVTOL revolution will be will have taken place
Got it.
or at least started.
All right. Well, what's next on Mike's list? I mean, what are you doing and
Yeah.
what do you plan to do?
So I
Where
had
can we
a
find you?
so I stepped down from the executive director role in 2023, middle of 2023. The board hired to some degree, I'll say a younger version. He's still got a lot of energy and a lot of ideas. So Angela Collins has been running the society now, coming up on it's 2.5, coming up on 3 years. I stayed on as a director of strategy for 2 years as a overlap and kind of get things keep moving and to help fill the gap where there was needs. And this past July, I stepped down and became a consultant. So it's Hirschberg Heuristics Advisors LLC, which you can shorten to H2 Advisors, a little shorter than Hirschberg Heuristics, because, I am interested in hydrogen. I think hydrogen, especially fuel cells, hydrogen electric, it's very interesting for vertical flight and conventional takeoff and landing. So I'm doing some consulting for different clients on propulsion and strategy and aircraft development. I'm primarily been focused more on kind of global issues rather than working for one specific aircraft developer. Again, I want to help the whole industry move forward. But yeah, it's been fun so far, and I like writing, so I've also published a couple papers, a bunch of articles, and things like that to help. Like I
Where
said, to help
where do you
educate.
publish or where do you get those published at?
So I have a column with Forbes. Forbes.com has a lot of contributors. I don't know, I think maybe have 1,000 different contributors. It's sort of a blog, but mine take a long time because I think a lot, and I don't use AI. But I've published a couple articles with with Vertiflight, the VFS, and wrote a paper. I accidentally wrote a book, 1,000 word article on the history of the Army at Ames. I've got another couple long papers I'm working on. I like to write, and
So
I
you
can make a lot of
are you
content.
writing a lot of history books? I mean, that'd be interesting to read about NASA Ames.
Yeah, I mean, I joke it's a book. It will probably be
Yeah,
published as a booklet, but um, yeah, I'm writing a lot of stuff. I'm writing a couple different histories. Yeah, I feel like I have a lot of stuff up here and would like to share it, and especially I told you I joined different societies in the 80s in college, and I'm still members of them. So Vertical Flight Society (AHS) I didn't learn about till '95. I was in college. I was a member of the AAA and SAE, and then later got involved with VFS and the Society of Automotive Engineers, which is now SAE International. And I've just been named a fellow of SAE, so I'm actually a fellow of all four of those organizations. I've been a member of for 40 years, and I think I'm the first person ever to be a fellow of all four societies.
what's the I got that you get the Oscar, the
Yeah, so
Emmy.
yeah,
Is
I
that
got that
is that like the equivalent?
I got like the
What would you
quadruple
call it?
crown here of technical societies.
Okay. Well, great, great. That's good to hear. That's very accomplishment to put a feather in your cap. So, well, it's been good talking with you, Mike. I appreciate the conversation. It really hopefully enlightened the audience. And well, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
All right, thanks, and have a good one.
Thanks. You too.